So one of the things that the Notice of Intent does is that it officially opens the administrative record that will house all of the data from studies conducted going forward. It will make any agreements not previously privileged available to anyone who wants them. It will basically provide the basis for restoration planning going forward.
Yeah, excuse me.
Yeah.
Is the scientific data then available to anyone through this record?
Yeah, in theory it is, and they've started making some of those data available via a website. And the pre-assessment data report, which is typically compiled and released following that phase, is still several months out. So until then, I suspect they'll continue posting the data to the website in raw form. I doubt they'll interpret it. As a matter of fact, it's pretty clear that they won't, but they'll make it available to the public for interpretation and so forth. Next slide, please. So the restoration planning phase is an important one. This is the one during which the extent, significance, magnitude of injuries are determined. There are a range of possible injuries that could have resulted from the oil spill. Injury here is defined as any observable or measurable adverse change in a natural resource or impairment of a public use. And so examples of some of the adverse changes in natural resources could be, for a given species, adverse change in survival, reproduction, growth, behavior, ecological processes may have been altered, and of course lost public uses. And the restoration options are identified and selected during this phase. The Exxon Valdez oil spill restoration planning process involved the, I'm just going to take this out of here. Yeah, crick in my neck. So the trustees of the Exxon Valdez oil spill engaged the public fairly often and relatively early. They held a symposium, I believe, about a year and a half later, bringing experts and members of the public together to hear their views. They also initiated a series of public scoping meetings that essentially gave, again, the public an opportunity to come forward with their ideas for restoration, and ultimately those ideas were part of the public record and should have and probably were considered by the trustees in the development of the actual restoration plan. Another opportunity for public engagement is when the draft restoration plan is produced. And then, of course, the restoration planning phase culminates in the completion of a final restoration plan that identifies all the preferred alternatives for restoring injured resources and reduced or lost of public services. Next slide. So the restoration plan will include restoration actions, and the sky is not the limit, okay? There are certain criteria that have to be used to select restoration options. Some of the legitimate restoration options that we know are acceptable because they were included in the Exxon Valdez oil spill restoration plan include general restoration, which may be physical manipulation of the environment, so in situ plantings, Spartina plantings, that kind of thing. Might mean precautionary management, so reducing the harvest pressure that might otherwise prevent an injured natural resource from making a fast and full recovery. And marine pollution, addressing marine pollution. Habitat protection and acquisition is a legitimate restoration action and was really a major theme of the Exxon Valdez oil spill restoration plan. Long-term monitoring and research to put in place a process to detect subtle delayed effects associated with the oil spill. Some of the questionable restoration actions, and something we're still trying to figure out internally, is to what extent can a restoration action address a damaged commercial brand like Gulf Seafood, for example. Restoration actions are supposed to make the public whole, and in theory that would make a subset of the public wholes. But again, the reputation of Gulf Seafood is critical to many Gulf residents and to many Gulf seafood businesses. And so we're trying to figure that one out internally. Some of the excluded restoration actions are those that clearly have no nexus or relation to the injured resource or lost service. So, for example, hypothetically, building a community center in northern Louisiana with no real physical connection to the affected area would be one of those, but that's just pulling out one off the top of my head. Next slide.
Question real quick.
Yeah.
Acquisition. What exactly does that mean? Habitat acquisition.
So that would entail identifying a strategic parcel of land that is important for nesting, habitat for bird species that were impacted by the oil spill. And so the trustees would would identify those habitats that are strategic to the nesting and foraging and loafing of bird species. And then they would go and maybe approach landowners to determine if they would be amenable to, selling their land on a voluntary basis. That was one of the strategies used in Alaska. So in Alaska, they acquired habitat upstream of important salmon spawning beds, and that would help. That would ultimately help protect that habitat from otherwise incompatible uses such as logging that would impede the recovery of injured salmon runs, for example.
Was it successful?
I don't know. I don't.
Well, that would, any kind of shoreline building or what have you, that would be an effect.
Mm-hmm. Another option for the Gulf is expanding this is just hypothetical, but expanding the configuration of the footprint of existing national wildlife refuges, for example, because those are typically the land management goals of those refuges are more compatible with conservation or managing the land for conservation. So the final phase of the NRDA process is the restoration implementation phase, and what happens is the trustees have their final restoration plan, they deliver it to the responsible parties, and at that point the parties can decide to implement the plan under the oversight of the trustees, or if they don't want to deal with implementation, they can write a check to the trustees and say, you implement it, here's the amount of money in your claim that you suggest it will cost to restore these injured resources. Or the responsible parties could say, we don't like it, and at that point the trustees can pursue civil action against the responsible parties and take them to court essentially. And they can also at that point seek an uncompensated claim from the Oil Spill Liability Trust Fund.
Excuse me. Rick mentioned that the settlement for Exxon Valdez was less than effective and equitable. And are there lessons that have been learned that are applicable? I mean, from that experience that are applicable to this. I mean, things that one can watch for in the assessment process or was that just, he mentioned that they had a settlement. The citizens decided to settle, and maybe that wasn't the best outcome for the environment.
Yeah, I can address that
Okay.
in detail if you don't want to. I think the biggest lesson in my view that we should take from Exxon Valdez is the reopener clause in the Exxon Valdez settlement was a complete joke and was almost destined to fail because of the way it's set up. EPA has learned from that, and subsequently there have been reopener clauses that are much more generous, if you will, and easy to comply with by people on our side. So that is a critical lesson I think that was learned just in the sort of technical aspect of how do you settle those cases.
Thanks, David. So last slide, and then I will wrap up because I'm over my time.
Can you tell me how much funding is in the oil spill trust fund as we speak?
Not off the top of my head. David might know. So in our communications with trustees and in commissions, congressional hearings, and before the President's Commission on Deepwater Horizon oil spill, we have been reiterating certain points and principles that we feel should be taken into account during the NRDA process. And what I've done is I've just enumerated those here. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail on any one of these in particular. I think they pretty much speak for themselves, but a couple that stand out that are important are things like integrating external peer review, conducting robust sampling. I mean, this is going to be really critical to the credibility of the NRDA process, and in order for the results to hold up in court, this is no time to be skimping on sampling and tapping the expertise of those who know a lot about the resources and the ecosystem that were affected. And I think I can address these in the Q&A, but I'm going to leave it at that. So, thanks.